Well, let's bring in tonight's starting panel. Ken Dilanian is with us, our NBC News national intelligence and national security reporter who broke that exclusive report this morning. Indira Lakshmanan, Boston Globe columnist and the chair of journalism ethics at Poynter, and Rick Stengel, former undersecretary for public diplomacy and public affairs at the State Department, also the former managing editor of Time magazine. Well, welcome to you all. And Mr. Dilanian, you brought us today's news, so I'll start with you. Maybe nothing happened of consequence at that meeting, but the drip, drip, drip nature of it sure looks like it's not nothing.
That's absolutely right, Brian. And that's really an interesting point. I mean, even if you take the most innocent explanation of all of this, that it really was a nothing burger and that the kind of things that this lawyer and this lobbyist were talking to the Trump campaign about were of no consequence, the way the Trump folks handled it is just so deeply suspicious. The story changed like 3 times, and then even when Don Jr. went on Fox News and said, "I've told you everything," today we learn he didn't tell us everything. And the person whose presence was not disclosed happens to be a kind of a political fixer who's represented Russian interests and is in some ways a suspicious character. Maybe not as suspicious as that quote from Bill Browder you read. I don't think he's an agent of Putin's secret police, but he's certainly a guy who's kind of operating in the shadows in Washington, has represented causes that are near and dear to the Putin government, and is somebody whose presence at this meeting is going to interest Bob Mueller and House and Senate investigators. So to not disclose that, you just have to wonder, as a political matter, what the Trump folks are thinking.
And Ken, this may not be answerable, may not be known. You may know and be unable to say, so just nod your head. Is there going to be any more from this one meeting? And of course, there were others.
Well, Brian, at the end of today, we sort of concluded here at NBC News that we still don't fully understand how many people were in this meeting. There's a talk of a translator being there whose name has been out, but we haven't confirmed it at NBC News. There's potentially another person in the meeting. So I think there's still things to be learned about this meeting, which is incredible, Brian, because, you know, there's been so many chances for the Trump administration to set the record straight and disclose everything.
Indira, while I ask for your forgiveness for the no fewer than 15 pronunciations I've used for your surname, you have been a journalist all your life. And I have to ask this about the trade. We don't know what we know because of government agencies being transparent and coming forward. It was another good week. Amid daily barbs that were fake news, it was another good week for a free and robust press.
Absolutely. And when Donald Trump says, "Oh, I applaud my son for his transparency," let's be honest, there is no way that Donald Trump Jr. would have ever released these emails had the New York Times not been on the phone with him saying, "We've got your emails and we're about to release them." That's the only reason he put them out there, in order to try to get ahead of the story, which was going to be out there anyway. And in answer to your question to Ken, which is there more coming? Absolutely, there's more coming. Everyone talks about, is there another shoe to drop? There are more shoes than in Imelda Marcos's entire closet that are still dropping one by one by one. And all of this, you know, we're talking about how many people were in this meeting. The latest reporting is showing there might have been 6, there might have been 7. You know, each person is suddenly, from all this Russo amnesia that we're hearing from the whole team Trump, suddenly it's like, oh, wait a second, no, actually there was someone else there. No, there was someone else there. There was a translator. There was this person. I mean, it is incredible to me that Donald Trump Jr. thinks that the worst thing about this meeting was that nothing came out of it. It's not that he actually accepted the meeting. Instead of calling up the FBI and saying, "Oh my goodness, I got an email in which somebody said that the Russian government is trying to help my father win the election. Help, you know, I'm here to report a crime." Instead of saying that, he said, "I love it," and went ahead with the meeting. And what he thinks is bad is that nothing good came out of it, according to him. I mean, really, we have to ask ourselves the question.
And Indira,
where
you're
is this
so
going?
right. That line, nothing came of it, has been the response from the president all through the surrogates, and we have no proof of that yet. We don't know that to be true or false. My old friend Rick Stengel, you are a master of optics. Back when you ran Time magazine, the cover that still means so much to Donald Trump, you knew the power of a single optic every week, and then you went to work for the State Department, where your job was optics for this country. Having said that, the optics this week don't look good.
The optics look just god-awful, and in fact, they have violated every rule of crisis communications that you can possibly have. rule one is to get it all out as soon as possible. And what they're doing, which is aiding the people in the media, is having it come out in tiny little droplets. And what that does is perpetuate the story. So it's just a very, very unprofessional operation. In fact, the fact that we're talking about, we don't even know how many people in the meeting. I mean, do you have a meeting here at NBC where you don't know how many people are in, or nobody has a record, or your assistant doesn't have a record? It's kind of astonishing. So, I mean, I don't know how they ran the Trump organization, but they can't run the White House like this for much longer.
So, Ken, we've got this this Russian lawyer who is so Russian, there has to be a translator to understand her for the Americans in the meeting. We have this former intel guy, at least former that we know of. And let us not forget the two Sergeys in the Oval Office. Let us not forget the possible invite for Putin to come to our White House, having already come to our presidential election. So when people ask you, what is it with Russia? Knowing that we're still halfway down that road, what's your answer thus far?
Well, Donald Trump was the most pro-Russian presidential candidate to run in modern history, Republican or Democrat. That was before all this stuff. Now, this meeting, to me, Brian, was a bit of a game changer because for months, you know, Republicans and Trump allies have been saying, where's the evidence of collusion? There's a lot of smoke, you say, but where's the actual evidence? Well, now we have an email from Rob Goldstone on behalf of the Agalarovs. You know, the father is an oligarch with ties to Putin, offering direct help from the Russian government to the Trump campaign, and Donald Trump accepts and takes the meeting. Now, that's not proof, but that's evidence of collusion, and it seems like it has changed the game a little bit in terms of where this investigation is headed, because it raises the question of what other meetings were accepted, what other communications happened along these lines.
Indira, a two-parter for you. Can it now be said that this White House is a single-issue White House, consumed by all things Russia? And secondly, was this particularly bad for credibility this week because you had the president tweeting about his son's transparency, you had the president giving kind of definitive statements about what a nothing the meeting had been?
Well, I mean, again, back to this whole question of the Trump team trying to call this a nothing burger. I mean, I think to the rest of America, we would consider this a double whopper that is giving the country indigestion and potentially heart failure. I mean, with a lot of hidden additives here, and we don't know everything that was in there, what kind of secret sauce. I mean, what troubles me, again, about this meeting is the Rashomon quality that we're hearing about it. Every single person in this meeting seems to have a different version of what happened or what didn't happen. Were they talking about adoption? Were they talking about sanctions? Did anything happen? Were documents passed? Was there stuff about the DNC? What actually happened in this meeting? And, you know, the latest former Soviet intel officer you were saying who was in the meeting, he says something different than the Russian lawyer. Everyone has a different take. To your first question about whether this has become a single-issue White House, I would say so. For anybody who is concerned about ethics and laws and democratic norms in this country, yes. Of course, the White House says differently. They say everything is smooth sailing, everything is going along as always, and the president's base is happy with them as they always have been. But I thought it was very interesting. Kenneth Cruz tweeted out today an article from Newsday that ran just, I think it was 8 days before President Nixon resigned. And it was a front page story saying President Nixon's base is still with him. They still love him. Well, guess what? 8 days later, he had to resign.
Yeah,
so having your base still love you doesn't necessarily guarantee that, you know, you're going to always be in power if you've broken the law or you've broken the democratic norms of our country.
I'll speak for the two guys with gray hair here in New York. We remember those days, and there was a lot of that going around. Hey, Ken, I have my spectacles on to read you from a Washington Post op-ed. I wanted to see if this sounds familiar to you. This was a former CIA intelligence officer writing today. Everything we know about the meeting, from whom it involved to how it was set up to how it unfolded, is in line with what intelligence analysts would expect an overture in a Russian influence operation to look like. It bears all the hallmarks of a professionally planned, carefully orchestrated intelligence, soft pitch, and that's an interesting term of art. And the Trump campaign's willingness to take the meeting, and more important, its failure to report the episode to U.S. authorities, may have been exactly the green light Russia was looking for to launch a more aggressive phase of intervention in the U.S. U.S. election. I heard another former intelligence officer today talk about that soft pitch. They want to make sure you don't report it and you're untroubled by the meeting. That green lights to them. You're kind of a willing target. You're someone they can do business with in the future.
You've got it perfectly, Brian. It's so interesting. Nearly every current and former intelligence officer you speak to about this seems to have the same view, and it's exactly the one you just articulated. And what they say is it doesn't really matter whether this lawyer and this lobbyist were dupes, were willing participants, had a different story, or, you know, the point is that the overture came in with an offer of help from the Russian government, and it came through the Agalerovs, who had a business relationship, don't forget, with the Trump family. They were going to build Trump Tower in Moscow. They were together on the Miss Universe pageant in Moscow. So the overture came in through a known person, and the Trump organization showed that it was willing to take the meeting. What happened after that, these intelligence officers say, is irrelevant, because the signal was sent, if in fact this was a dangle, which is the term they use by Russian intelligence, the signal was sent that the Trump campaign was willing to play. And so then the question becomes, well, what else happened? What other overtures were made, Brian?
So Rick Stengel, David Gergen, who served 4 presidents, said tonight it's the most incompetent cover-up he has ever seen. To your earlier point about malpractice in at least media management, does this now mean they will always be reactive? There's no getting the upper hand. They don't look institutionally willing or able to get the upper hand?
So I'm going to come back to that, Brian, because at the State Department, I dealt with Russian disinformation and Russian active measures, as they call it. And I just want to add one thing to what the intelligence officer said, is that sometimes the Russians do a feint where, in an intelligence way, they make you want to think that they're doing something that they're not doing, that maybe they wanted us to think that they're tampering in this election. They have a term of art in the Russian military called the gray zone. And the gray zone is about the fact that nothing seems clear at all. That is what they like it. They like frozen conflicts. They like things to not look clear, and that's what they're doing now. So, and to get to your actual first question, yes, I mean, they're completely on the back foot and will be probably forever while the investigation is going on. Until that is consummated, I mean, they're going to be asking questions about this. And you have a president who, by all accounts, is absolutely obsessed with this and maybe watching right now about it.
Our great thanks to our starting panel. Last day of the week, but our first segment on a Friday night. To Ken, to Indira, to Rick, thank you so much. Coming up after